Hey there, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to put the AOD back together, so looking forward to this one. Should be an interesting build. Alright, so a couple things straight off the bat with these transmissions that, if you're not familiar with them, that I think you need to know. First off, the bushings should always be replaced, and they could be particularly challenging with this unit simply because well, I guess there's two bushings that can be tricky. One, the direct drum bushing, that can take some doing to get it out. A slide hammer and a collet puller that I had for this one didn't actually work, so I had to chisel it out, and it was a pain in the ass. And then the case bushing, the one that sits in the very back of the case, can also be tricky if you don't have the special removal or install tools. Getting it out really isn't that difficult as long as you have a good external 3-jaw puller. And I'll talk about the one I use to pull this one because I don't have the factory tool. But to install it, you're going to want the specialized rear case bushing tool that OTC makes for Ford. And it installs it to the perfect depth every single time. So we'll go over that when we get to that point of the case, but I'm going to basically go through the sub-assemblies from the front of the transmission to the back. We'll put the pump together, then the drums, and then from there we'll be ready to go ahead and start installing everything into the case. And there's also a few lubrication mods that I'll cover as I go through everything, and these are mods that are very prudent to do for the AOD specifically. You could do them for the others too in the family, the AOD E47075, but there's a couple that are AOD specific that address weaknesses and vulnerabilities when it comes to lube flow to certain parts. So like I said, I'll get to that and go over in detail when we get to those areas of the transmission. And then the other things that I would say not mandatory, but it's recommended that you have available to you are the special lip seal installation tools. There's going to be 4 apply pistons that need to go in their respective locations. So, 3 in drums and 1 in the pump. And it's nice to have those tools because getting those seals in place, especially the reverse input drum with the square cut seals, can be challenging and tedious if you don't have these special lip seal protection tools. They're available online on eBay and Amazon in the aftermarket, the blue ones in particular, and then of course if you see the OTC original ones you can buy those too. So I have ones for these transmissions, and then there's some others that I do that have very similar style lip seals, and I have the tools for them as well. But if you do a lot of work on Ford AOD E470 and 75W transmissions, or you plan on doing a lot of work on them, I would definitely invest in those tools. They're not that expensive either. So, all right, let's go ahead and get closer to the bench. I'll run through part selection and we'll begin. All right, so this rebuild will serve as a good template or example for what I would consider a reliable, comprehensive overhaul for a stock to mild performance application. Okay, the vehicle in question is a 1967 Ford Mustang, and this is the same transmission that you saw in the teardown video, the AOD versus 4R70W video, if you watch that, as well as the valve body videos. And the situation here, just to kind of recap its history, is that it came in with a neutral and third condition, and the reasons for that, I believe, are multifactorial. There isn't one clear smoking gun, but when we took the transmission down, there was something like 95 thousandths clearance in the direct clutch. And it went out the door that way, which is a little surprising to me. Somebody had rebuilt this thing 2 years ago, but it didn't get back on the road until about 2 months ago or so, and the owner took it to one shop. They misadjusted the TV cable. It didn't run right, didn't shift into third, and when it finally did, it was neutral. So the TV valve, the TV control valve and the valve body was stuck. It was difficult to get out, and then between that and the clearance and the misadjusted TV cable kind of led to the owner taking it to another shop and having them pull it and bring it to me for overhaul. And the builder, whoever rebuilt this transmission in 2022, that's when it was done, November 2022 I believe, did what we would call a refresh in the industry. A refresh is basically you're just replacing the clutch module, which is all the friction discs in the transmission, and the overdrive band. He did install a 4R70 2.3 accumulator piston, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to install a new one, but beyond that, there wasn't much done. There was no bushings replaced. The one-way assemblies were reused. He did install a Superior Tech spiral lock snap ring for the intermediate one-way clutch, which is a good upgrade. I mean, I have another one on the bench we're going to install as well, but there was no max pack installed in the Direct, and I always install max pack. You'll see that it's an Alto product. So anytime you're going back to one of these transmissions, whether it be the AOD or the E or the 470 75W, it's always good to beef up the Direct drum. It's just simply a very weak spot in the transmission. Okay, as I mentioned, no bushings were replaced. We replaced all the bushings in this unit. The bushings can be tricky, it just is what it is. If you're doing a high performance build, I would recommend you install an upgraded overdrive servo and then do the 4R70 retro swap with the 98 and up reverse input drum with the mechanical diode and the AOD sun shell. Okay, the AOD sun shell will still have a sun gear that will work with the AOD gear set. So unless you're doing a whole retro swap of the entire gear train from a 4R70W, you don't want to use any 4R70W parts beyond just that reverse input drum. All right, and the reason why you want to swap the sun shell over is because the sun shell's shorter in the AODE and up to accommodate the longer, or deeper reverse input drum. And the reason you're doing that to begin with is the stronger one-way assembly for the intermediate and the wider band surface, so you can run a heavy-duty overdrive band that's 2 inches wide as opposed to 1.5 inches, which is what you're stuck with when it comes to the AOD. All right, we got new pump gears on the bench, new one-way assemblies as mentioned. We have a new reverse band, so the reverse band was reused. The planet and the rear sun gear are also replaced in this unit. The previous builder reinstalled both the planet and the rear sun gear, even though they had little chips or fractures along the crest of the tooth. Now just kind of orient the camera down toward that area of the bench. Yeah, for whatever reason, he put the planet and the sun gear back in, and they should have been replaced at that point. Like I said, this thing has like 50 miles on it, so unless we want to believe that all that damage occurred within 50 miles of driving or less, it was like that when he put it back in. The band surface was also warped, so we have a new one here. We're going to dunk it in fresh transmission fluid in a minute, but when it goes back in, we don't have to worry about planet failure or general gear train failure. All right, I also have a couple specialty tools on the bench toward the end, and I'll go down there now and we can talk a little bit more about that rear case bushing, because once I get into the assembly portion, I'm not going to probably address it a whole lot. All right, so you see a inside micrometer or outside micrometer, I should say, for 2 to 3 inches, as well as a caliper and the rear case bushing installation tool. So as I mentioned, I pulled the old bushing out using a 3-jaw puller in conjunction with a slide hammer. All right, here's the old bushing. As you can see, it's quite worn. So what I did do prior to pulling it is I measured the diameter of the hub here on the outside, and then I measured the case bushing's inner diameter. So I had a measurement of 2.284 and a hub the outer diameter measurement of 2.282. And 2/1000 clearance is generally what you want. So if this was your transmission, you were going back with it, and those are the measurements you came up with, the bushing is visually worn, but it would still be like on the outside of spec. I like to see no more than about 1.5 inches, or excuse me, 1.5 thousandths clearance, yeah, 1.5 inches. 1.5 thousandths clearance on bushings, 2/1000 is fine. But any more than 2/1000 would indicate excessive wear, and like any more than 3/1000, and none of your parts are going to be on the center line of the bore of the case. So that's why it's so important to replace these, especially in the 2-wheel drive units. The 4x4 units don't wear as much because they have a transfer case there stabilizing that back half of the case, but for the 2-wheel drive units, all you have is a slip yoke connected to the drive shaft, and the drive shaft is constantly moving around a little bit up and down as pinion angles change a little bit throughout driving. So as you're going over bumps or your grades or you're accelerating or whatever the case may be, a little bit more torsional stress is seen with the bushings, in that inner diameter for the 2-wheel drive vehicles than they are for the 4x4s. So it's just something to keep in mind. And like I said, and I'll flash the part number for the OTC slide hammer. It's not the specialty tool. You can buy this thing on Amazon. It comes with the 3-jaw puller and a 2-jaw attachment. So if you want to run it as a 2-jaw, you can, but you want to pull this bushing out as it's set up for a 3-jaw exterior pull. and you'll get it out within like 3 or 4 wraps. You know, if I think it took me maybe 5. So it cost $85 shipped on Amazon, and you have to modify the 3-jaw puller a little bit so that the puller legs themselves will get underneath the flange there on the case and engage the backside of that bushing. So let me show you the puller actually while I'm at it. So here's the slide hammer itself, along with the cup, and the cup basically allows you to expand or contract the diameter of the puller legs, which are here. So you can see on the underside I modified them a little bit. Nothing crazy, but I did have to take off that rounded portion at the very underside of each of these legs. So if, like I said, you know, you plan on replacing the case bushing, which is something that should be on your things to do list when you go back with these, and you don't have anything to take this bushing out, this tool is a good option for you. Like I said, 85 bucks shipped, not too bad. Arrived very next day from Amazon, and you know, it was good to go. All right, so we see the rest of the parts here. I kind of covered, you know, why we have the micrometer and the little caliper and what you can do, you know, as means and ways to approach the rear case bushing issue. And the only thing I'll cover, and I'll go over this in more detail when we get there, is this is going to be our installation tool for the low reverse servo. What it does is it will check your travel, and there's a procedure which I'll cover in detail once we get to that point. And I don't know how mandatory this tool is. I've used it before, you know, never had any issues with it, but I've also rebuilt these without the tool, and I've never had issues there either. Really the only time you need to be concerned is if you're doing a case swap. Okay, case dimensions are ever so slightly different, so if you have a different case, then there's a possibility that you may need a different rear servo piston. There are 3 different lengths, and I have 2 of the lengths on the bench. I got the longest and the second longest, and they're, you know, they can be distinguished by the number of ID grooves toward the base of the pin. And like I said, I'll cover that in more detail when we get there. But long story short, if you are going back with maybe a new Planet like I am, it may be a good idea too to have a couple different lengths, and those servos aren't that expensive. I don't have the shortest because worst case scenario I can just grind on the pin that corresponds to the middle length and, you know, make it short. Alright, bearings are generally reusable. These bearings were in excellent shape. No need to purchase a new bearing kit. The only thing I don't have on the bench right now is a thrust washer kit for the stator. That thrust washer is selective, and that is what controls or adjusts your front end play, which should be in the neighborhood of between 40 and 70 thousandths. The thrust washer kits are aftermarket. There are factory thrust washers of different thicknesses, and they're color coded. I'll put a chart on the screen once we get to the point where we're assembling the pump, which will be very soon, and you can check that out. Alright, I talked for way too much, you know, much longer than I thought I would in this intro, but let's go ahead and get started. And like I said, we'll begin with the pump, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to install all the apply pistons in all of the drums and the, you know, the back half of the pump, and then we'll build up the individual clutch packs in each, and then move to the gear train and, you know, back half of the case. Alright, we'll start with checking our pump gear clearance. So the pump gears that came out of this thing were scored up. You know, they had a lot of scoring up in here, mostly on the face, on the bottom side. And so, or actually I should say on the top side of the gears, the bottom side, top side is really front and rear, I should, you know, more accurately. So, well, what we did is just purchase some new gears. These gears are all the same as far as I know. And then the other thing we did is machine the stator so it's flush and true again. Alright, so I talked about lube mods, and you know, a little bit in general. So the first lube mod that we're going to come to is on the stator. You want to drill this hole here to between 85 and 93 thousandths of an inch. Okay, And the reason you're going to do that is to promote better lubrication flow to your intermediate one-way clutch assembly. So the AODs and the 4R70s, or AODs rather, use the 7-element roller assembly, and in a stock application it's usually not too vulnerable, but in high performance, I mean, these things can be starved for lube flow and they'll burn up pretty quick. So high RPM deals, that's why you really want to retro the 98 and up 4R70 reverse input drum with the mechanical diode, and then just use that, do the same lube mod through the stator, but that's a much stronger one-way assembly. Alright, the other lube mod I'll talk about, because I don't know when I'm going to come back to it, is going to be on your direct shaft. Alright, so what you see here is kind of a cross cutout. The channels themselves are about maybe a 1/16 or so of an inch deep, 1/16 of an inch. And the reason you're doing that is in the event the splines in the direct drum wear to the extent that the rear half or the rear end of the drive shaft comes in direct contact with the output shaft, you do run the risk of cutting off lubrication flow from the output shaft into the rear of the gear train there. So this will allow lube flow to occur no matter what happens with those splines, and it's just a good prudent update to do when it comes to these AODs. So there's this one, there's the pump mod, and then there's a couple more that we'll discuss when we get to the rear of the case. Alright, and then your flats are going to be with the dot facing up, and where the beveled side of the converter engagement tabs is facing front. Okay, just get in and kind of rotate your gears, make sure that nothing weird is going on, nothing's hanging up. I mean, that's all you're trying to do. And I could just test the clearance between the crescent and the face of the gears. And they want to move as well. Okay. Actually, they look okay. Alright, so that may not be as straight as it could be. So I'm going to use this one here, and I could fit my 1.5 thou feeler gauge. It's dragging a little bit, but that's fine. I mean, we're able to fit it cleanly through. This thing must not be as perfectly flat as I thought it was. This I know this is a machine part. Nope, that's 3/1000. Sorry. 3/1000 will be a serious problem. So we're going to assemble the pump as is, and we should be good, though I will check it just to make sure on the converter hub right there to make sure that it's not binding or seized up once we put everything together. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is install the front seal, and we'll use a seal driver for that. So I'm actually going to put that on the ground and do it there, because this bench, I mean, there's a whole bunch of parts on it and stuff will start flopping around all over the place. So let me change out the battery first, because we're almost out, and then we'll resume with this on the ground on a towel and we'll pound that seal in. Alright, one thing I want to address before we begin is the orientation of the bushing. So you notice here we have an oil groove. That oil groove is directional, meaning you can't just install this bushing in whatever direction you want. You got to pay attention to where the oil groove empties and where it stops, partway through the bushing. And you want the end that stops partway through to face the seal. Okay? You want the flow to be directed back in toward the pump gears. If you install it backwards, then eventually flow will overwhelm the seal, and that will cause a leak, you know, probably a massive one at the converter hub. So make sure that you pay attention. All the Fords of this vintage and into the E4ODs, 4R100s, 5R110s, they're all the same in this regard. And stake your bushing as well as you've seen. And I'll bring it back real quick. So you want to use the stake points so that you can stake the bushing in place. You could use red Loctite as well, although I found that not to be necessary, though there are several bushings in here where I have used red Loctite, and I'll touch on those when we get there. Okay, easy does it. Okay, so now we're getting ready for the pump. So just lube everything up. Get the inside of the seal as well. And a whole lot of lube on that pocket. Okay, you don't want any dry startups. If you want, you can put some fresh transmission fluid in here as well. So again, just keeping in mind orientation. Some of these gears will have dots, some won't, but you just want to make sure your flats for your converter hub, or the bevels I should say, are facing front. So the flats should be facing you. Okay, same with the stator. Be generous with the assembly lube. And then we have our rear bushing here. We can lube that later. And then I just line up my 3 holes with my 3 holes on the pump body, and that should get her done. So 10 millimeters and 12 to 16 foot-pounds of torque is what the ATSG manual calls for. So I typically do 15. So just go every other bolt until you get them all torqued up, and then just check them. And I'm going to bring the converter over. I want to reach in front of the camera, so what you want to do is just very carefully insert the pump and mate it to the converter. And just to be doubly sure, I'm going to put a little lube on the hub so that there's no concerns. Alright, we have it fully installed and meshed. And that spins nice and freely. So we're working with somewhere between 1 and 1.5 thousandths of clearance for the gears and the pump body deck surface, which is perfectly fine. Alright, let me get the converter out of the way. We're not going to need it anymore. Alright, so now what we need to do is replace our lip seals for our intermediate piston and then install that along with our return spring assembly. And then the last thing we're going to do is install the stator sealing rings for our reverse input and forward clutch drums. So as with all transmissions, if you're not familiar with them, it's the first time working on a unit, or you're just new to transmissions in general, I always recommend that you leave the old lip seals installed. And the reason for that is there's going to be some transmissions where they have lip seals that are very, very similar in terms of size and dimension and appearance, but they're not the same and they're not interchangeable. And so if you mistakenly, put the wrong lip seal in the wrong location, the transmission is going to come back out again, and you'll have to deal with that. Okay, so we have an inner seal and an outer seal. And notice the inner seal has the engagement portion of the seal facing out with the sealing surface itself inboard. So you know that went on the inner diameter of the piston. And then with the outer diameter, you have the engagement portion inboard and the sealing surface outboard. Now on this particular applied piston, it's obvious as to which seal goes which just because of the size difference. But for whatever reason, if it was not obvious between, like I said, different components, where one may have an inboard seal but another nearly identical component, like two different pistons, one took an outboard seal, then it's something you just want to be aware of. Will you get mixed up? Probably not. I mean, you should notice the difference visually when you go to install the seal and you realize, oh, this is not going in, it looks funny, something's wrong here. I mean, that should be a clear indication that you may be mixed up the lip seals. Hey, just get them all installed, make sure they're in their respective grooves all the way around. So these feel supple. Like I said, whoever rebuilt this last, I believe they installed new lip seals. Sometimes on a refresh that doesn't happen because either the builder is lazy, or the builder doesn't have the tools, or the customer didn't pay for anything beyond just replacing the clutches. And I'm curious to see what the story was here. Maybe the builder just did what he was paid to do. He was not paid to overhaul the entire transmission. He was just paid to refresh it. And if that's the case, then he can be kind of let off the hook for some part selection concerns. But procedurally, there's, like I said, a few things that he should have done. Regardless, got a little bit of material here in the pocket. I'm going to get rid of that. Okay, lube everything up. get everything nice and saturated with this assembly lube. These pistons and their respective, pockets or locations are going to be a little trickier to do than most because of just the way they're designed to fit together, and you have the special lip seal protection / installation tools to help. But if you don't, it'll be a little bit trickier. Alright, we'll settle this in. I'm going to see if I can install this one without the special tool. This is just a standard lip seal installation tool. I get a lot of questions for, in terms of where I can find these, or, where you can buy them. WIT Performance, that's Whatever It Takes Transmission Performance, has them either, direct on their website or on eBay, and they have an eBay store where you can buy all manner of things. So if they don't have it listed on eBay, just reach out to them, send them a direct message, and they may be able to get you what you need, either through eBay or just, sell it to you directly. Alright, I don't want to be here all day, so I'm just going to cheat. Alright, so get the tool in place, make sure it's fully seated, and then have some of the bosses exposed, and then you can take like a drift punch and just start tapping down on it. In fact, let me go get a hammer. And this may take a while too. I mean, I don't do these too often, so it's like I'm getting reacquainted myself. So looks like the technique is to kind of lay your forearm over the entire tool, and that'll prevent it from, wanting to pop out. So we have 2 of the 3 sides installed. And then just seat it. Alright, this can go wherever in the board, doesn't matter. So here's your return spring assembly, and you have these little engagement tabs here, and they snap right into the underside of this groove on the pump body. So just line up your springs with your bosses. Don't do what I just did and try to put the springs over there, and then just simply press down. Okay, make sure you're fully engaged all the way around, just check it. Seems okay. Alright, last but not least, we have our sealing rings. So these are the click style, the cast steel. So 2 and 2. Alright, so you want to install your big ones first. And use whatever methods that you want. I mean, I tried to go at it with the snap ring pliers, but found that using my hands just by themselves was better. And then my hands are slippery, so it's tough to get them engaged. Okay, I was monkeying around with it for a little bit too long, so I just went off camera. But what I realized is I gotta press in the end that has the engagement tab on the top side and then allow the engagement tab on the bottom side to come over top and hook into it. So I'm going to go like this, and then I'm going to just take a real thin screwdriver and kind of hold it in place, and then let the top side, or let the end with the engagement tab on the underside float over it, so to speak, and then engage it. And it's going to be easier said than done. Okay, just make sure that they move freely in their respective grooves. There's nothing getting caught up or whatever. And you can install, you know, any number of selective washers over top these rings. I mean, the rings will allow the washer to pass them. All right, gloves back on. And the top sealing ring set's a lot easier than the bottom ring. And, you know, like I said, this could very well be a product of the degree of infrequency that I see these things. So my technique is not going to be as nearly as well honed as somebody that does them all the time. All right, so let's go ahead and do the reverse input drum. Here's our intermediate clutch. We're going to use an alto clutch module. And then we have the high performance alto red band that I like for these. I install this band, just the 1.5 inch stock width variety, but the performance version of it in all my AODs that I do. Alright, so here is the spiral lock ring from Superior Tech. So here's how they have you install it. It's a fairly straightforward deal. It is once you can get it out of the package. So we have 2 rings and 2 retainers, so this will service 2 transmissions. And let me actually go clean this off. It's got some packing material on it, so you don't want that getting into the unit. Alright, now we'll go ahead and install our roller clutch assembly. So when it comes out of the package, it's probably going to have some packing grease on it. So just want to take a moment and a little bit of brake cleaner and just wipe it off with a lint-free rag. Okay, just install the assembly like so. If you install it upside down, or you try to install it upside down, you know, with these little tabs and other things facing up, I mean, you'll never get it on. So it's hard to screw that up. All right. So this is going to rotate counterclockwise and lock clockwise. So you just want to get it seated. Try to get it as square as you can. And it's going to be tough to rotate. In fact, I think one thing I would suggest you do, and I should have done this myself, is let's put a little transmission fluid, a little bit of transmission fluid on the assembly, on the rollers, so that on startup, when this thing starts rotating or starts moving, before fresh transmission fluid washes over it via the stator, you don't have a dry start here on your race. I don't have a little squirt bottle, so I'm gonna have to get a little messy with it. So just basically around the rollers is what you want to introduce some fluid. Or I should say where you want to introduce fluid, not what, where. Alright, this will ensure that you don't have any kind of dry starts potentially damaging the assembly, and that's obviously the last thing you'd want. Okay, that's what you want to hear when you spin it. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and install a retainer plate and then the spiral lock ring. So check these tabs. If they're bowed out a little bit, you're going to need to collapse them. So you want to make sure that there's no interference between the snap ring groove or these tabs where they're maybe overlapping it that would otherwise prevent installation of the spiral lock ring. So go ahead and get your retainer in position. And just do a quick check all the way around, make sure everything's good. And then from there you can start installing your snap ring. Just get it started. Alright, that can be very tricky to install. So, I mean, it was hard for me to talk and do what I was doing at the same time, but what I was doing is just simply working this out and at the same time prying the snap ring into the groove. I mean, it'll go, it's just going to take you a minute to get it all in there. And then you just want to go around and check to make sure that it's fully seated all the way around, both levels, if you will, of that snap ring into the groove, both spirals. Okay, this is going to move around a little bit, that's fine. So, what the instructions then have you do is just simply stake it at 6 locations, just like this. So, looks like 12 and 6, 10 and 2, and 4 and 8. So you don't need to be caveman with it, just a rounded chisel and a hammer is fine. In fact, I'll stake it here, and here is my, starting point, and then we'll just go here, and then here, 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 and here. Okay, that's installed. So now we get to tackle the piston. So you have 2 square cut seals. All right, pretty straightforward deal, at least until you get to the point where you're ready to actually install them. Then it gets very tricky, especially if you don't have these installation tools. Get a pick for this. Okay, one thing you always want to check for is your bleeder bowl. Just make sure it's moving and making noise. If it's not, it could possibly be stuck or seized. So if this goes back in like that, then you're going to have bind-ups, because the fluid that would otherwise pool and escape through the bleeder bowl would just simply accumulate and eventually apply the reverse input clutch. That's no bueno. Okay, tons of assembly lube. I mean, that's really one of the overarching themes when it comes to putting together these transmissions. You just want to be super generous with the lube. We'll get our protector tool. Okay, just want to make sure that you're fully seated. And if you're not sure, because I'm not sure, I'm gonna pull it out and just double check. All right, there it goes. So this is the actual OTC tool. So my aftermarket tool was working for a while, but you know, I don't think it's as well made, and it could possibly be worn out, or just my technique is not sufficient for, you know, for whatever it offers, I guess. I mean, that's one possible explanation. Like I said, I don't do these that much, so. All right, now we'll install a new Belleville return plate. So get your plate seat there, and then install the plate itself. And then you're gonna have 2 snap rings in this clutch. The waved snap ring is what you want to use for the Belleville plate. Get some of these other tools out of the way. Okay, this will fight you as well. So just be aware and be ready for it. Alright, that was a little sloppy. Normally what I do is I'll take it and I'll hold it kind of against my belly and go around with it. I mean, I'm trying to keep it in the shot, but at the same time, it's a little awkward. I mean, I'm not trying to make excuses, but that's how I normally do it. But if I did it that way, you'd never be able to see what it is I'm doing. Okay, 4 frictions, 4 steels. You have your apply plate or pressure plate, and then you're going to have your clutch, and then you're going to have your backing plate. Clutch, steel, so you have 3 flat steels in this clutch, 4 frictions. And you should have between 40 and 70 thousandths. So we're going to use a 76 thousandths of an inch thick snap ring. I don't know if you can see that, but so we might be on the tight side. As long as we have at least 40, we're good, but thinking we might be a little less. Here's 41 thousandths. Let's see. Yeah, we're kind of tight. Well, maybe not. It's a little tight here. Yeah, this is a little tight. So what we're going to need to do is make adjustments. And you can see that the plate itself is sitting above the snap ring groove. Alright, my battery's about to die, so I'm going to replace that, then we'll continue. Alright, we have the dial indicator set up so we can measure our actual clearance. And then based on what this tells us, I'm going to either have to find the thinnest snap ring available for this clutch, which is I think 66 to 68 thousandths, or I have to machine one of these 2 pressure plates in here. Alright, we're set at 0. Here's the reverse apply. And not quite returning to 0. Okay, make sure that your clutch is fully seated against the piston or whatever it's sitting on against. In this case, the Belleville spring, but you want to make sure it's fully seated. Yeah, we are right at 40. Maybe. $39 to 40 thousandths is what I'm saying. So clutch packs tend to open up just a little bit when they go back in. That said, because I'm right at the low end, I'm going to look for another snap ring. I know I don't have one here in the shop, so I'm headed to the Transpart supplier later today anyway for other things. So I'll see if they have one available. If they do, great. That's what I'll install, and I'll bring you back to show you. We'll do the clutch clearance measurement again, and I'll show you what the difference is. But if not, we're going to let this ride. Incidentally, the frictions and the steels that came out of here. All right, here are the old steels. and here are the old frictions. Okay, the forward and the reverse input are exactly the same. So the frictions are 60 thou thick or 62 thou thick. And I measured those are the same. Here's one of the forward frictions. In fact, these are slightly thinner because they're dry. And steels are going to be 67 thousandths. And the new steels are exactly the same as these older steels. Okay, so I'm going to tentatively call this drum done. And so we're going to go over to the other bench so that we can work on the forward clutch. Alright, same deal. So we have lip seal protector tools, which are, I'll be honest, I think they're only marginally effective. I mean, they allow you to install everything, but you know, every time I do one of these, it is always a bear. So, new lip seals. Alright. Throw your old lip seals off the bench. God forbid you get them confused with the new ones and you install the old ones back on. I'm only halfway joking here. And I will flash charts on the screen each time we do one of these clutch packs so you can see all the different selective snap rings that are available. This way you know to stock up if you plan on doing a build. I mean, in most cases you won't need to swap, but sometimes you will. You know, sometimes you'll have to. Just lube up the tools. I guess I should put the piston in first. That would help. I mean, none of these are really all that easy, to be honest. It's just an ornery transmission when it comes to assembly for, you know, either first timers or infrequent flyers. I mean, the idea behind these tools is that you just seat them and then you push down on the piston and it should go right in, but that's not actually what happens. I mean, it's wanting to fight you the whole way. All right. Not quite as difficult as the reverse input, but not easy either. All right, let me go to the press
And I'll install this, and then we'll resume stacking the clutches up, and then we'll air check it through the pump. Okay, time to install the clutch. So we're going to start with our cushion plate. And then we have 5 frictions, 5 steels, all alto high energy for the frictions. And then I think the steels are a Ray-Bestis module. So this clutch needs a minimum of 50 thousandths clearance because it is a working clutch, unlike most transmissions where in the normal automatic forward pattern shift strategy you have the forward clutch is usually a non-working clutch, meaning once it's on, you're in drive, or any forward range setting for that matter, it does not come off. But these transmissions, this comes off. So it comes off on the 3/4 shift. And if it's too tight, you'll drag in fourth. And if it's really tight, you'll have a tie-up. So you have to make sure you get the requisite amount of clearance in here. And that's non-negotiable. And it's just as critical as the reverse drum. Okay. It looks right, but I won't know until we get the dial indicator on it. Alright, I'm going to lube up the bushings for the reverse input drum. And then we're going to use some thick green assembly lube to secure the bearing. Because if we're okay clearance wise, then the only reason that this drum will come off is if I find a thinner snap ring for this right here, so I can get this clearance opened up a little bit. Now, if this was high performance, I wouldn't let it go out the door only 40 thousandths or 38 or whatever it has, because I'd be concerned about some sort of centrifugal apply at high RPM. I'd have to modify the piston or do something to mitigate that risk if that's my only option. Like I can't adjust it because I don't have snap rings or whatever. More than likely though, I would just machine this, this backing plate. I mean, when in doubt, machine it out. Alright, I'm going to go off camera for a minute while I set this up. I don't know if that's actually not going to be long enough. Let me actually take all this stuff over to the other bench and then I'll see you over there. Alright, we have the indicator set up and zeroed, so the forward feed is going to be right here. And let me make sure that that indicator is in focus so we can see what kind of clearance we got. Okay, it looks like about 75 thousandths. So 75 is fine. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but again, because this is a working clutch that comes off in fourth, you don't want it too tight. You need a minimum of 50. That's a minimum. 89 thousandths is the max spec that this calls for. So, and when there's the 3/4 transition occurring, you don't have the kind of timing event that you do with like a 700R4. The direct clutch stays on while the band is applied for fourth. So the band comes off when you downshift, and again, the direct clutch is on. So it's not as critical when it comes to the clearance itself, other than that you need a minimum of 50 thou, and then like I said, a max of 89 thousandths. Okay, so I'm going to call these two drums done for now, and we're ready to move on to the direct drum. Okay, here's our drum. And we have the snap ring and the factory spec 6 clutch stack. Okay, The intention here is not to actually install this, it's just here for if I need it or reference or whatever the case. But the intention here is to install the power pack. So, here is our frictions. And then we have our steels, and there's a backing plate in here. It's a little thinner to allow for the additional steels and frictions. So you have multiple different kinds of steels. Okay, and I have to clean this stuff off real quick because of cosmoline, but here's the backing plate. And then you have a couple of different thicknesses to choose from as far as the steel plates. So you got some thicker steels, and you have some thinner steels. And these are like cosmoline welded together. Yeah, they don't want to come off, or come apart rather. So here's the installation instructions. These are also available online. So they give you what you need to know for the 5 and the 6 clutch stack for the cast iron drum. Okay, they have a separate product for the corrugated metal or sheet steel style later drums. This transmission originally had such a drum installed, however the splines in it were worn, and the relationship between that direct drive shaft and those splines was not very good. There was a lot of play in that, when they spline together, so I elected not to reuse it. Alright, let me clean these off and then we'll come back, we'll install our piston. We got a lip seal here in the drum, and then we have the outer lip seal. This piston's also different. Okay, this piston came with this drum, and the reason I'm replacing the piston too is because the inner bore here on the other one was worn out. I mean, it was heavily scored, like metal at some point had passed through it. So, before I do, you probably already see this .062 written on the drum. So what we're doing here is we're opening up the 62 thousandths, these lubrication passages. Okay, this will allow more fluid flow for lubrication to the gear train. And so for all your AODs, this is something you want to do. It's one of those kind of like essential lube mods. As mentioned, there are others, but for just a everyday driver, nothing crazy, just to improve the longevity of both the gear set and your one-way assemblies. This is one of those lube mods that I strongly recommend you do. Alright, let me clean these plates off and then we'll come back and resume. And then I guess only one other thing before somebody questions or wonders what was going on in my previous explanation about the apply and release of overdrive and the relationship to the forward clutch. The forward clutch does obviously come back on when you downshift the third, but Transgo has you open up that forward feed so that you have a crisper downshift, and the timing of that particular event is a little more optimized. And so the feed is 85 to 93 thousandths. That's what they tell you to open up that separator plate orifice too. So anyway, I just wanted to cover that. I realized I didn't give you the full explanation. Alright, got everything cleaned off. So clearance that they're recommending here is kind of tight as you saw. So 25 to 35 thousandths. And so let's go ahead and start our stack. I'm just going to use the thin steels first just to see where I'm at. Ideally I'd like maybe 1 or even 2 thick steels just because they're thicker. Okay, so we're going to try to fit 8 frictions in here. And we'll see what happens. Alright, let's go ahead and install our apply piston and get that done first. Oh, you know what? We gotta replace the drum seal. Don't want to forget. clean. Luckily for us, it's actually a lot easier to install it than it is to remove it. All right. Then lube everything up and then we'll install the new one. Just carefully maneuver it over the journal, the base of the journal, I should say. And let it find its groove, so to speak. You have the snap ring groove here, and then you have the groove for your lip seal. Just really want to eyeball it, make sure it's 100% in that groove, it's not, part way out or whatever. And then you have your piston lip seal. Okay. Alright, I overcomplicated that, so that's on me. It's not that difficult, not nearly as difficult as I made it look. So I openly admit my technique could stand to be improved with these things. I just don't do enough of them to get really, really good with them. These transmissions can be finicky. Alright, I'm going to go to the foot press, install the snap ring, and then we'll go ahead and resume with the stack up. Okay, no waves or cushion plates, so just flat steel friction until you're all out of them. So unless it's obvious that I'm way out my clearance wise, we'll go ahead and stack this up, stick the apply plate in or the backing plate, and then we'll measure clearance. Okay, this is a 77 thousandths thick snap ring. This is the factory snap ring. I don't think I have 35 thousandths in here, and I have, like I said, I started with the thinnest steels. Okay, the first we have to replace these sealing ring grooves. In fact, you know what? I'm gonna just, these are the old sealing ring grooves. I'm gonna just leave them on there for now. But here are the new ones, and we'll put these on when we're ready to go for final assembly. All right, let me get this set up on the vise, as I measure this clearance using this dial indicator set up here. This is what I use, and then we'll go ahead and measure our clearance. All right, we have the dial indicator set up, so let's go ahead and zero it out. And then we're going to introduce air here on the direct clutch feed, which you probably can't see it from that angle, but it is the innermost passage on the output shaft closest to the drum. Alright, so let's see. Between 25 and 35 is what Alto is calling for. Okay, I think I'm returning slightly below 0. 33 on an indicator and maybe a thou below 0. So, based on Alto's instructions, we're good. They do suggest having 1 or 2 thick steel plates, you know, the 2 thick ones that they have in the kit, but, you know, it would be a little bit too tight if we ran one in there, but I'm good with this. It appears to be fine. The main thing is you want to ensure that you're not bound up in this clutch. So again, for a cruiser, I'm good. I would prefer to have it on the higher end of you know, that 35 thou limit, maybe 35, even a little bit more than that for something that's going to see a lot of RPM, but for something like this should be fine. All right, so have it inverted. There's a little bushing driver down here to kind of support it. And then we're just gonna install all the sealing rings carefully one by one, and that's basically it. Okay, while these are not as fussy as the ones on the stator, at least the larger ones, you do want to be careful not to break any of them. And then once you have them, just spin them around, make sure that none of them are binding up or catching. Okay, that's it. Now we're ready to make our final preparations to install everything into the case. So first things first, we're going to remove the clutch out of the direct drum. Okay, we don't want that in there. Looks like we have a steel that wants to stay behind. And looks like it's stuck on some assembly lube. Alright, so I have our drum, and go ahead and just lube everything up in here. So lube the splines, lube the journal, get down in there and lube that bushing. Might actually have to do that by hand, it's a little tight. And by the way, this bushing is a pain to get out. And I think I mentioned it in the intro, it seems so long ago now, but I had to take a chisel down here and actually go in this way with a really thin, narrow chisel and cut the bushing vertically in 3 places before it started to come loose. And then when I finally got the slide hammer on it, you know, I was able to take it out. But I had to mangle it just to get it out of there. So be wary. You know, if you don't have a variety of chisels, blind hole pullers, and, you know, bushing tools that these things call for, then, you know, you're going to be stuck. Even if you have all the tools, you know, it's going to take you sometimes a lot longer than you might think just to get bushings out of here. And this one, the case, just because of the way it is and, you know, just lack of access, the forward drum bushing can also be tricky. So just to, you know, give you a heads up, and when I say the forward drum, I really mean the, you know, the shaft. All right, so let's go ahead and grab our ring gear basket. Have that standing by. And then we have our flange. And then we have our bearing. Okay, so we have an open face Torrington bearing, our axial style bearing. This is going to go on the inside of the flange like this. Okay, and it's going to kind of locate on the back of the direct drum. Okay, here's the case bearing. So I mean, you're not going to get the two of them confused. Case bearing is much, much larger. All right, we'll flip the direct drum over, and we'll put a whole bunch of assembly lube on this bearing. And just stick it right there. Alright, next grab your output shaft and your flange. So what you need to do here is take your flange and kind of allow it to slide over the sealing rings and onto the shaft. And you can certainly install the rings after you've installed the shaft, that's fine. Alright, let me get some space here. Alright, now what we need to do is we need to install our snap ring that holds the flange to the shaft. You just position it like so. And it will want to twist up on you, so you just gotta, you know, keep focused on it. Make sure it doesn't do that, like it did there. Hey, just check your sealing rings, make sure they're not damaged or whatever. So you got your shaft installed, go ahead and lube it up. And lube up your your sealing rings here for the direct drum. Alright, grab your ring gear basket and have your snap ring for the ring gear to flange standing by. So you're going to position it like this. And you got to flip it upside down. And this is why you want to leave the clutch and all that other stuff out of the drum so that it's not interfering. So now you're going to spline everything together. And then just lift up. Seat the output shaft and try not to get your glove caught in the snap ring. Okay, that is the assembly. It is ready to be installed into the case. So I like to leave that other stuff out of it so I can get good purchase, because I'm going to lower it carefully into the case, and I don't want any kind of mess ups where, because the clutch pack is in the way, you know, I can't get a good grip. All I'm doing is gripping the splines and maybe they slip out of my hand. Okay, we're using a boatload of assembly lube over here. Got our rings, got our journal surfaces. If you want, you can even lube the drive gear for the Speedo. And then this little crater right here, that's where your governor location ball goes. And then this other groove is for the governor snap ring, you know, governor / counterweight assembly. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to first install the low roller clutch onto the planet. I'm sorry about that. So these roller assemblies, it is very often times that they will have to be reassembled once you pull them out. And by the way, this is the same part number as the for the TH400s and 4L80E low rollers. I mean, it's the same exact roller. I think it goes to a couple other transmissions as well. I'm not sure which ones, but I know for a fact it is the same for the 4L80s, TH400s. I can already hear rollers rolling around in here. Okay, we got a boatload of rollers missing. I mean, not missing, but they are not where they're supposed to be. Alright, so you want this side facing up and the cam side facing down. You can squirt some fresh transmission fluid if you want in here, that's fine. I never do. I mean, never had issues with this thing coming back. It's a little different than the intermediate sprag in that regard. But like I said, it's certainly something you can do. Let's take a little bit of it. I mean, anything you can do to prevent a completely dry start on anything that normally is lubricated, it's never a bad thing. Now, when they put this transmission back in, they're going to run it, idle it, let things circulate, let the fluid get pretty much everywhere inside the case that it possibly can to prime the unit so that when they go and test drive it, they know that they're at level fluid-wise and that all the frictions have been thoroughly soaked in. You want to soak your frictions roughly a half hour or so before you put them to work, okay? Not before you install them into the drum or into the case or wherever it is that they go. Because you might do that and then let the transmission sit for 5 years because the vehicle's going together. I mean, that's not unheard of, a 5-year build time, and the engine and transmission are built early on, and then all the body and structural work and interior and stuff like that, finish work takes the preponderance of the time for the project, and the thing's just sitting there, so you got to soak the frictions all over again. All right, cool. All right, now we have our center support. Okay, we want to lube this up. So we lube the journal and we lube the bushing. You have to install the center support with the planet. Okay, you can't install one without the other, unfortunately. And when we get ready to drop these into the case, we need to clock this little cutout in alignment with the overdrive band anchor pin. So you're going to rotate this counterclockwise. And my hands are extremely slippery. Okay, it should freewheel counterclockwise and lock clockwise, which it does. Okay, this is going to be your anti-clunk spring. We'll show you where this goes once we're ready to install it in the case. And then the only other thing that is associated with the band and the drum is going to be your rear support ring or anti-fretting ring. So that goes in the case, then you put your band and then you put your assembly here. Alright, so now we are ready to install stuff into the case. So we'll reposition the camera and get you with a bird's eye view and we'll begin that work.